You want to build a character in GURPS, but you look at the basic set, and the characters book is 336 pages long. Of course, that includes equipment and other things, but the first 263 pages are just character information. Okay, that's a bit unfair, because many of those pages are just lists of things, advantages, skills, etc. But still, it's an awful lot of reading with no good outline, in my opinion. Hey everyone, I'm Chris Norman, and in this video, I'm going to give you the guidelines I use when I create a character. If you've watched the first character video, it was more about the concepts. I wanted people new to GURPS to understand what a character was and what its component parts are, but I didn't get into any of the specifics beyond that point. So let me walk you through the process I use when I'm creating a character. First, as I mentioned in the character video, you have to have a character concept. And of course, this is based on the world in which the character is going to live. Hopefully, your GM will give you some guidelines as to the setting. Is it low fantasy, high fantasy, Old West, superhero, Old West superhero? Once you know where your character will be, you can figure out who your character will be. This is immensely easier if you're using the Dungeon Fantasy RPG, since character creation is more regimented. Pick a class and a race, and follow the class and race templates to arrive at your character. But even with these templates, there are decisions that you need to make, and I think these guidelines will help. Once you get an idea of what you want your character to be, now we'll start to map it into GURPS. And from that character video, you know that characters are created out of three things: attributes, advantages, and skills. I've had this long-held belief that you want to spend between 50 and 60% of your total points on attributes, and then 20 to 30% on advantages and 15 to 20% on skills. It felt about right, but I never had any proof until recently. I took all of the characters that I had been given over the past 2 years due to my work on the GURPS Game Aid for Foundry, and I put them in a Google spreadsheet. I have 36 characters, ranging from 100 to 559 points. And here are the numbers. For all characters, the average percentage spent on attributes was 55.78%, 25.2% on advantages, and 19.2% on skills. Now, of course, this is a small sample, but it confirmed my gut feeling, so I'm going with it. It's just a guideline, and of course, there are always outliers, but it's a good place to start. And then you can customize your character as you see fit. This is GURPS, after all. Your GM should tell you your starting points: 100, 150, 250, whatever. They might also tell you the number of points of disadvantages that you can take. And this is where we will start. First, you'll need to decide if you want any disadvantages at all. I highly recommend that you take some for 3 reasons. 1, character disadvantages are more memorable. Everybody knows that Superman can fly, but can he shoot laser beams out of his eyes? Well, I think he did that in one of the movies, but everyone, everywhere knows his limitation: kryptonite. And my favorite drunken, lecherous, gunslinging cleric, Jake. He was memorable because he was a drunk, trying to redeem himself. And defining this first disadvantage helped me when building the character. Since Jake was an alcoholic, I knew not to purchase the fit advantage, or raise his perception, or give him a lot of survival skills. They just wouldn't fit with his primary disadvantage. And it would have been a lot harder to bolt on some disadvantage at the end of the character creation process, and hope it didn't conflict with my concept. It was much easier to know what Jake couldn't do while picking what he could. Does that make sense? And this leads me to point number 2. Having a disadvantage allows the GM to use it as an adventure hook. If you have a dependent, a little sibling at home, and they get kidnapped, well, we know what you're going to be doing for this adventure. And even though it was your disadvantage, the adventure is centered around you. So you can explore your backstory, fight your nemesis, gain the ultimate reward, or drunkenly sleep with the saloon matron, pass out, and smell like death in the morning. Hey, whatever moves the plot along, right? And the final reason for getting a disadvantage: the points. While your character will be disadvantaged in some aspect, they'll get to be more powerful than others. It's a great trade-off. As I've said before, I love the disadvantage system in GURPS. You get to make flawed yet personal characters that you can play. One warning, don't go overboard with the disadvantages, and hopefully your GM doesn't allow this. But making your character a brain in a box might seem cool from a movie standpoint, but you probably won't have as much fun as your more able-bodied teammates. So now you have your character concept with disadvantages, which affects the number of points you can spend. If your starting total is 150 points, but you're allowed to take 30 points in disadvantages and do so, then you actually have 180 points to spend on the character. And using my highly scientific formula, that means you should consider spending between 90 and 108 points on attributes, 36 to 54 points on advantages, and 27 to 36 points on skills. Now, hold on a minute. Don't get too tied to those numbers. Remember, this is just a guideline, and it can vary a lot. Consider this a starting point written in chalk. If you look at the spreadsheet, one character, Donnie, only spent 27 of their total points on attributes, and Alejandro spent 80%. Now, you might ask, why the smaller percentage on skills? Well, if you think about it, it makes sense. When starting out, you may have a lot of skills, but not a lot of points in skills, because this is something you would level up over time. It might be harder to level up your character's IQ while adventuring, but it's not impossible, of course, and pizza could help. But you don't normally think of gaining IQ or dexterity in the middle of a dungeon. So you might consider purchasing the level of attributes that will last for the lifetime of your character. Who knows what will happen over time? But if you're dreaming of a strong character and start out with a 10 strength, well, you have a long haul ahead of you. Also, many advantages are not leveled. They're just either on or off, like ambidexterity or flying. So you either have them or you don't. And it might be rare that you can gain a brand new advantage while adventuring. But of course, it can happen. But you probably want to purchase your core character advantages at the start, like flying, and see where it goes from there. You might not be able to purchase everything that you want from your character concept. If you've taken a look at the GURPS Unofficial Handbook of the Marvel Universe, Spider-Man is over 600 points, and Iron Man and Hulk are over 2,000. Needless to say, your 100-point Iron Man wannabe is going to be more like Aluminum Boy or Paper-Mache Person. Hey, but that's what adventuring is all about. Let your GM know where you want to go with your character, and they might be able to hook that into their adventure. Remember, this is a cooperative game, not competitive. Tell them the long-term goals of your character concept, and I bet they'll work to make it happen. So let's start with attributes. I checked in the basic set, and while they're trying to explain the starting attributes, it's also intermingled with a bunch of useless math, and they either gloss over or don't really highlight the important things about the attributes. And I only say useless because GCS does this work for you. And if you're building a character in GURPS, then please use some kind of character creation tool like GCS. It'll be so much easier. I recently watched a GURPS character creation video that was created in the last year or so, and they used a spreadsheet to do the work. Maybe they thought they had to be pure, but for the love of Pete, why put yourself through that? You can see how easy it is to use in the GCS video. And although I did create a character in that video, I wasn't really explaining why I made the decisions that I did. FYI, that video is based on version 4 of GCS, and Rich now has released version 5, which works the same but looks a little different. Either way, it's free, cross-platform, and necessary, for me at least. Side note, if you ever happen to have a baby, there's a really wonderful book called The Girlfriend's Guide to Pregnancy. It's a great book because it tells you the real stuff, the stuff your girlfriend would tell you, not the medical stuff that the doctor tells you. Well, think of this as your girlfriend's guide to GURPS attributes. We'll start with strength, which costs 10 character points for 1 point of strength. And if you're used to D&D, then GURPS strength is very similar. Strength controls 3 major aspects in GURPS. 1, it's your level of melee damage. If you're playing in a world where weapons are muscle-powered, then the strength table indicates your swing and thrust damage. 2, Strength determines how much you can carry. And this comes into play if you're using encumbrance, which you really should since it's calculated for you by GCS. Now, a lot of people might not like the idea of encumbrance, and it's a huge pain in the butt if you don't have a tool like GCS. But now you do, and like everything else in GURPS, encumbrance adds some interesting decisions for your characters. A prime example would be armor. Heavier armor provides more protection, but also may increase your encumbrance level, which means your dodge value goes down, as does your move. So do you want your character to be light on their feet, or would you prefer that they stay wrapped in steel, an easy target to hit but harder to damage, and of course slower? My character Grand is a druid, used to living in the forest. He values speed over protection, so tries to maintain an encumbrance level of none. But that doesn't stop him from squeezing into as much armor as he can. Since we also play with hit locations, and that's not hard to do, but that's another time, he purchased a single piece of light scale body armor just for the torso. So for the majority of attacks, he has 3 points of damage resistance. But everywhere else, he just has 1 point cloth armor. But again, it was an interesting decision I had to make. Do I keep Grand light on his feet? Or do I wrap him in iron and steel? And the final aspect of strength is hit points. Your starting hit points are equal to your strength value. If you watch the combat video, then you know that GURPS hit points aren't some abstract value. They are the physical amount of damage that you can take. So it maps rather well with strength. The more muscular, bulky you are, the more hit points you have. And this is different from D&D. As a side note, increased strength does not increase your ability to hit. D&D combines the process of hitting and defending into a single roll, so in that system, it makes sense that the strength will add to your chance to hit, but that's not how it's done in GURPS. The next attribute is intelligence, or IQ. It's almost exactly the same as D&D. However, since approximately half of the skills in GURPS are based on IQ, it's a very primary attribute, which is why it costs 20 character points per point. Also note, GURPS does not have a wisdom attribute. Your ability to be pious is more controlled by an advantage like power investiture, or magery if you're magical. Your ability to remember a prayer or perform a ritual is based on your IQ. Dexterity is again very similar to D&D. And like IQ, approximately half of the skills are based on dexterity, which is why it also costs 20 character points per point. And Dex is the basis for all skills used to determine if you hit in combat, melee or ranged. So again, it's rather important. But Dex also affects speed, which is used to determine your turn order in combat. And speed affects move and dodge. So there's a cascading effect when changing Dex. Now you might think that health works like Constitution in D&D, and it does, partially, but health in GURPS does not affect hit points. Only strength affects hit points. So why have a health attribute? Well, many checks are done against health. Once you get to 0 HP, you check against your health to see if you can stay awake. And if you get to -1 times your maximum hit points, you check against your health to see if you stay alive. Also, many physical resistances, like poison, are checked against your health. The default affliction advantage checks against the target's health to determine if they are afflicted with some malady. And finally, you roll versus health to recover from being stunned. And if you're stunned in combat, you really want to recover from it. Health also affects speed. The equation for speed is Dex plus health divided by 4. And move is speed rounded down, and dodge is speed plus 3 rounded down. So 1 point of Dex, or 1 point of health, gives you an additional 0.25 points of speed, and health is cheaper at 10 character points per level. And finally, your starting fatigue points are equal to your health. And if you play with the extra effort rules, and why would you not, then fatigue points become really important. So yeah, health is a pretty important attribute. And then there are the secondary attributes, willpower and perception. Both start equal to IQ, and then you can raise or lower them based on your character concept, for 5 points each. But a common customization is to separate willpower and perception from IQ, and I highly recommend this. Please read P.K. Levine's home rules about it, Link in the description. Willpower and perception start at 10 and can be purchased for 5 points per level, but no longer go up with IQ. It's just easier to separate those attributes and let the players decide what their IQ, willpower, and perception will be. And by the way, this is easy to do in GCS. And D&D really doesn't have a willpower statistic. The ability to resist in D&D is determined by saving throws. Willpower in GURPS is the strength of your mind. It's used when you have to contest your mind power against somebody else, or maintain concentration, or do a fright check. Out of all of the attributes, willpower is the least generous, meaning you don't get a lot of extras when buying willpower. But don't let that fool you. It represents your mind strength, and depending on the situation, you may want a lot of it. So don't treat this like old AD&D's charisma attribute. If you're playing in a horror setting, you will be very, very glad I talked you into high willpower, because of the fright check. While HP starts equal to your strength, and FP starts equal to your health, you can also buy them up independently. Each extra hit point costs 2 points, and each extra fatigue point costs 3 points. You might ask, why do fatigue points cost more? Well, that's because they're used more. In general, in GURPS, you try not to lose any HP, if you can help it. But you'll be spending fatigue points all day long doing extra effort or casting spells or using powers. Some other things to consider. Move and dodge are determined by speed, rounded down, which is determined by dex and health. So getting speed to a whole number gives you another hex in movement and another point of dodge. Do you increase the dex or the health, or just raise speed directly by 0.25 points for 5 character points? Again, interesting decisions you can make just about attributes. Can you see why I said character creation is its own little minigame? Page 14 of the basic set discusses what the various attributes levels mean, but the table doesn't go above 15. I found the GURPS Wiki table expands upon the basic set table to include higher scores. Links in the description. That should give you some idea how to purchase the attributes. To start, spend 50 or 60% of your total points on the attributes that match your character concept, and move on. You can always go back and rejigger the attributes later. And now you start looking through advantages. Start with the mundane advantages that your character would have. Are they ambidextrous? Do they have good balance? Easy things like that. And then, if the setting allows, you might consider adding exotic or supernatural advantages. Your GM may give you a list of allowable advantages and disadvantages. Or they may not. Just remember, everything on your character sheet is by agreement only, meaning the GM has to sign off on your character. If you try to purchase flying as an advantage, and the GM is running an Old West campaign, probably no amount of pizza is going to let you keep it. So here's where you could go down the rabbit hole. If you're building a character with only mundane advantages, it's pretty easy to find advantages that work. But if the setting allows supernatural or exotic advantages, well, then you get to build those yourself. And while it is amazingly fun, it can take a while. The Powers videos talk a lot about that, and they might be a good watch for you. There's only one advantage I specifically want to talk about, and that is high pain threshold. The purpose of high pain threshold is that your character does not suffer the shock penalty from being wounded in combat. Are you playing with shock penalties? You don't have to, but again, it offers interesting decisions for your players. Case in point, my character Grend. He wasn't supposed to be a frontline fighter, and so he didn't get the high pain threshold advantage. But that means now, in combat, if he takes a hit and suffers damage, the next round he's at a minus to do any IQ or dex-based skills, which includes skills used to hit somebody, but doesn't include active defenses. Whew. So for Grend, combat is very much about not getting hit at all. And I have to maneuver to use the terrain or tank character Shay as cover to reduce the likelihood that he gets hurt. So, if you play with shock penalties, then your players have the decision of whether or not to buy high pain threshold. Do they gamble that if they get into combat they won't get hurt, or do they spend the 10 character points for the advantage and not worry about it as much? And finally, skills, which are the bread and butter of the GURPS system. So it may seem funny that we've allocated the least amount of character points for skills. But that's going on the assumption that your character starts out as a novice in most things, and then it becomes easy to bump up skill levels as you adventure and acquire character points. It only costs 1 character point to get rank 1 of a skill, so for 10 character points you can get 10 different skills. If you played D&D 5e, you know that there are just 18 skills. This is by design. Wizards of the Coast determined to streamline and simplify D&D to make it more accessible to new players, while still being fun for experienced players. And they were successful. I mean, hugely successful. So if you're looking at the D&D skills, trying to figure out how they match to a GURPS skill or skills, well, I don't think I could do a good job. There are 55 pages of skills in the basic set. For example, the D&D performance skill could equate to the GURPS performance skill, which is acting on a stage, or the acting skill, or the dancing skill, or the singing. Well, there are quite a lot of related skills in GURPS. So your character could be good at all of them, or just the ones that fit your character concept. See what I did there? GURPS' huge list of skills gives you more chances to better define your character. Maybe your character is really good at singing, but not acting or dancing. There's a great list of skills broken out by category on the GURPS Wiki, link in the description. But in general, GURPS is going to give you a lot more choices to define what your character is good at, and that could be great fun. Your group might really be interested in role-playing the intricacies of social interaction. Enraged Eggplant has 4 or 5 videos discussing all the different ways you can play out the various types of influence and social status. Links in the description. But that depends on you and your group. Your GM may not want to get deep into a huge list of skills, and instead use the optional wildcard skills rule on basic set page 175. But for my money, since the skills are already in GCS, I kind of like picking the specific skills my characters are good at, and enjoy role-playing those. Grand, my half-ogre druid, is good at a lot of different survival skills, as befits a druid in Nordland. So he has Survival Arctic, and Survival Woodlands, and Survival Mountains, all of which have come up in our adventures. He's also knowledgeable in a lot of different hidden lores, elementals, fairies, nature spirits, undead, while his friend, Enoch, is knowledgeable in hidden lore demons and devils and other arcane areas. And we enjoy role-playing who gets to try to figure out what kind of creature the big bad baddie is. Some notes. Perception is an attribute in GURPS, not a skill. In GURPS, you're either innately perceptive or oblivious. It's not something that you learn, although you can get better at it. Athletics in GURPS could just be a strength check, or you could map it to skills like body sense, or freefall, or hiking, or jumping, or lifting. You get the picture. The D&D wisdom skills will either map to IQ or perception-based skills in GURPS, and the D&D charisma skills will map to either IQ or willpower-based skills. Charisma isn't an attribute in GURPS, but instead it's modeled with a variety of things. Advantages like are you pretty or handsome, have sex appeal or social status, or skills like are you diplomatic or intimidating or a fast talker. And that's just a few examples. And the force of personality, as described by the player's handbook, is literally the GURPS willpower attribute. Now, as to skill levels, Dr. Kromm himself posted on the forums a general idea of what a skill level represents, link in the description, which mirrors what the basic set says on page 172. So you might ask yourself, why buy a skill greater than 16, since a roll of 17 or 18 on a skill check is always a failure? And it's simple. It's because of the modifiers. For example, to hit someone in the eye is a -9 to your attack skill. So a bow skill of 16 would give you an effective skill of 7. Not really that good. So higher skill levels help you offset any negative modifiers. However, the common wisdom is that once you get into the master range, 20 to 25, you really don't need to go any higher. You'll get better and more interesting results by purchasing other supporting skills, techniques, or perks. One final note on skills. Sean Punch posted that certain skills are necessary for adventures, and then listed a bunch of everyman skills that players might consider buying. Things that a true hero would probably already have if they were a main character in a novel. I linked that post in the description. Wow, there's certainly going to be a lot of good links in the description. And finally, equipment. You might not think of equipment as part of your character design, but in GURPS it really is. The skills you've taken for your melee or ranged attack don't actually do an attack, only the equipment does. So you need to purchase equipment. GURPS has a starting monetary value based on the tech level, $1,000 at tech level 3, and all of the costs of the equipment are in GCS, so it's easy to keep track of that. And of course, GCS knows the weight of the equipment, so it correctly calculates your encumbrance. So while this would be a real pain in the butt on paper, if you're using a tool like GCS, it's really easy to see the summary of costs and weights, which allows you to play with that dimension. Again, more interesting decisions for your players. Of course, some people might complain about all the fiddliness. And my only response is, this is all optional. But of all the players I've known through the years, most of them like this level of fiddliness, so long as they aren't burdened by it. If all they have to do is decide whether they want to pick up that larger sword or heavier rifle at the cost of moving 1 hex slower, then it's an interesting decision. If they had to do the math before they could make that decision, well, that would get to be too much, and I agree. I would hate to have to figure out all this on paper. But since the tool does the work for us, we can include things like encumbrance and hit locations, basically for free. So go forth, my friends. You now have enough information to confidently create a new GURPS character. Okay, maybe not confidently, but hopefully with less trepidation. I know, creating a character in GURPS is a big ask, but honestly, it's the hidden gem in the RPG world. I hope that you can also find joy in the mini-game I call GURPS character creation. And as always, thank you for watching.